Welcome, everyone. You're watching Coronavirus in Context. I'm Dr. John White, Chief Medical Officer at WebMD. We think of COVID-19 as a respiratory virus, but there's an emerging set of data that talks about the role of the microbiome. And there was a fascinating article in the British Medical Journal recently that talked about the gut microbiome predicting severity of disease for COVID and the immunologic response. So to find out what's really going on, I went straight to the author. From the Chinese University of Hong Kong, I want to welcome Professor Sue Eng. Dr. Eng, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Dr. White, for this invitation.
Well, let's talk about this study because it's really creating some discussion about the role of the microbiome, our gut bacteria, in terms of impacting the severity of COVID. Is it because of the immunologic response of the microbiome? Is that what's going on here? Remind us the role of the gut.
So we know that the human gut is one of the largest organs in our body that actually regulates our immune response. And in fact, it helps protect us against different infections, including SARS-CoV-2. And each one of us here have trillions of bacteria in our gut, and they play a lot of role. And I think one of the
trillions? Wow.
Trillions, that's right. And it's like an organ on its own. And it's like it controls our immune system. It controls how we work our metabolic system, how our brain function, the hormones in our body. I think in this context of COVID-19, it's fascinating when we found that patients with COVID-19 have very different composition of the gut microbiome to those without disease. But what's more important, what is missing in those with COVID-19 are the good bacteria that helps us generate a very good immune response. So I think this is going to be a long story because we now know that some patients have very mild disease and no symptoms, whereas others with COVID-19 end up in ICU and require cytokine support. They have this storm due to a very inflammatory state. And it comes down to that likely some of the gut bacteria that are good in helping us to prevent such an immune response is actually missing. So our group were able to do that during the third wave of COVID in Hong Kong. We found patients with and without disease, and we're able to follow them up over a period of time to look at what's happening to the gut microbiota.
Because some people could argue, well, maybe those persons that were hospitalized with COVID, it wasn't that they had lots of bad bacteria to begin with, but rather the infection gave them that. Kind of like a chicken and egg issue in terms of which came first, that patients with SARS didn't have good bacteria to begin with, or that SARS got rid of the good bacteria. How do we know which one comes first?
I think that's a really important question. The cause and effect, is it because of being so sick that caused them to have such bad bacteria, or the other way around? I mean, I think our study right now shows the association, but what's remarkable is that after the patient has recovered from COVID-19, you have thought that they would have cleared the virus and their body would have come back to a normal state of mind. But their missing bacteria continues. The good bacteria has never been novelized, what we call as dysbiosis. And we're very concerned because it is likely that dysbiosis may account for some of the symptoms of long COVID that we now hear. People who have fatigue, who have mental problems, people who can't sleep, the loss of taste and loss of sense continue. And it's quite clear that this multi-system inflammatory state may actually relate to our gut microbiome. But of course, to answer your direct question about which is the chicken and which is the egg, I think we are now currently conducting animal experiments, and we find that actually by putting the missing without the good bacteria, you generate a bad immune response, and that could actually prove the causality. But what's important is we look at the blood of these patients in the blood marker, and when you have really dysbiosis, your blood inflammatory response was higher, that might account for you ending up in ICU because your lung is just not functioning so
What were you,
well.
remind us what you were looking for in the blood.
So we are looking at certain markers that are known to generate a hyperimmune response. So for example, the bad cytokines, we call them the chemokines, and also the pro-inflammatory blood markers.
Interleukin 6, some of the others.
That's right, IL-6, TNF-alpha. These are the markers that are known to be associated with the cytokine storm and mortality in these patients.
Now, how realistic is it for us to start doing fecal samples to look at the microbiome? Is it something we need to be doing? Is it something that maybe we'll do in a few months? How urgent is it, do you think, that we should add this in terms of our, in some ways, our diagnostic strategy is who needs more care? That could help us in the guidance of monoclonal antibodies earlier on in disease. It could help us in terms of therapeutics. Should we be looking at fecal samples?
So, John, that's a question that is very close to my heart. In fact, I see this as 3 levels in terms of stool sort of testing or microbiome testing. In fact, in Hong Kong, the Chinese News of Hong Kong, we are one of the first centers to use stool to test for SARS-CoV-2. And we have now tested close to, I think, 6,000 children. And we found positivity of actually 0.2%, which is much higher than nasopharyngeal sort of or deep throat saliva, because it's non-invasive. And we now know SARS-CoV-2 is not just a lung disease, because many people, about 30 to 40%, get gut manifestation and gut symptoms as well.
Diarrhea, primarily.
That's right.
Is that right?
Absolutely. Abdominal pain. And we are able to detect the breakdown product or the virus within the stool. So we use PCR. And right now, apart from deep throat saliva, we complement testing with stool testing to diagnose the virus itself.
Right.
I think the second level you're talking about is, can we use this as a marker to predict response or to look at people's severity?
Because we actually did a story several months ago about, for epidemiologic purposes, looking at sewage in the city and trying to determine what the percent positivity may be. But here you could be talking about almost as we do in cancer therapy sometimes, in terms of using information, you know, not necessarily pharmacogenomics, but the same principles of using the microbiome to determine the therapeutic agents that one would choose. Is that right?
No, absolutely. Because what's fascinating is when we test about 1,000 healthy people in Hong Kong, we found that 40% actually had dysbiosis. What we meant is abnormal gut microbiome. And these are the people who are higher risk of having the infection. So the diabetics, the elderly, the obese, those with chronic disease have abnormal gut microbiome. And this may in fact explain why they are more susceptible, but more importantly, why when they are infected, they have worse outcome. And epidemiology studies have so shown that. So if we have that as a clue, one of the ways exactly would be one day we may be able to test them to identify the type of outcome that they may have and the type of treatment. Of course, in the future, I believe that the gut microbiome also affects the vaccine response. And we're seeing these data with flu vaccine, that some people may generate longer term immunity and antibody, whereas others don't. So the personalized way would be with a simple stool test. We know that COVID will be here for a long time, and we might be able to personalize to see which type of people may respond better to certain vaccine.
Based on that, when do you think we'll see that? In the next few months?
I think probably within, so by the end of this year. I mean, right now we are already sort of generating a lot of different collaboration, and we are seeing that, for example, in mainland China, stool testing and anal swab testing has been put in place as one way to complement what we have now.
Well, Dr. Ng, you know what everyone is thinking while they're listening to you. They're thinking, do I need to start taking probiotics? Do I need to start taking prebiotics? And maybe, first of all, maybe you can explain the difference for us, prebiotics and probiotics. And should people start taking them to make sure they have good gut immunity?
So this is a very important and commonly asked question. I think the difference between probiotics is probiotics we know are live bacteria
Right.
that are known to
Mhm.
generate a beneficial effect on our body, and prebiotics are purely so food components. For example, asparagus has a lot of
Fiber.
prebiotics in it, the byproduct, and they help to induce the growth of the good bacteria. Both are generally safe and serve them good. My personal advice, I mean, during the COVID pandemic, I mean, is threefold. I think the first is we know that our diet influences our gut microbiome. So the easiest way for our citizen to do is really to have a very healthy diet. And what I meant by that is less processed food, less food with food additives, emulsifiers. These are known to cause inflammatory response to a bacteria. And of course, fiber and exercise, because ample data show this generate really good bacteria in the gut. And right now, what we have done is actually we have formed based on a data or big data analysis from a big COVID-19 cohort, we developed a microbiome immunity product that is targeted to what is missing in COVID-19 patients. So not all probiotics are the same as we believe. And I think what is important as we move forward in this probiotics of era, we need to target what is missing and understand the functions. It may not just be the bacteria, it's what this bacteria do. So we did a pilot study in COVID-19 patients, and we were really intrigued to find that they developed more antibody. They also were discharged from hospital more sort of rapidly, and they had less sort of symptoms. So it is quite a bright future and promising future in alleviating some of these detrimental effects of the virus.
But you're looking at persons who you've already analyzed their gut, and then you're helping them decide what they may need, correct? For the general population listening, should they consider taking probiotics? Should they talk to their doctor first? You know, everyone wants to figure out how do they help their immunity.
I would say that because we well know that probiotics are generally sort of safe, and it depends on what your role is in doing it. For example, in people who are known to have probably dysbiosis, the people with chronic disease, those who are elderly, we found that the good bacteria definitely are much lower than the sort of children. And in this cohort, I would think that it's important to talk to your doctor to make sure there's no contraindications for you in taking specific probiotic. But in the general healthy sort of cohort, my advice is select them sort of carefully. I think it should be scientifically driven eventually in terms of the probiotic that one sort of use, because which one should you choose? There are so many sort of different types. And I think we now know from the data that there are certain that contains certain probiotic that are aimed to regulate our immune sort of response.
And finally, we've been talking about the microbiome for the last few years in various disease conditions. We've been talking about it in heart disease, rheumatologic disease, diabetes. Are you surprised at all that we're seeing this relationship to severity of COVID?
Absolutely not. I mean, I'm a firm believer that I think in the next decade, we now know that our gut microbiome is a central organ that really influence many of the outcomes. Like you said, John, even in cancers or therapeutics, if I were to predict, I think our gut microbiome is going to have a huge, long impact on our future, partly because of the hygiene hypothesis. We now know that when you lack a lot of the good bacteria in your gut, you're more likely to get immune-mediated diseases such as multiple sclerosis, such as rheumatoid sort of diseases. And about in the sort of 50 years ago, we're seeing this, large surge of this immune-mediated disease because the surrounding is much more hygienic. So ironically, what's going to happen is right now, because of the disease, because of the environment and the social status, we are actually having a very different behavior. And over time, we may be wiping out some of the ancestral gut microbiome that is related to us in the healthy state. So I think in the next 50 years, there's going to be a change in the epidemiology of different chronic diseases because of what COVID-19 has brought. So
I don't think it's going to be that long. I think we're going to figure that out sooner. Dr. Eng, I want to thank you for taking the time, for sharing your insights, for really helping remind us about the role of the gut. As you've talked about, one of the largest organs in our body and really plays a pivotal role in our immunity.
thank you.
And thank you for watching. If you have a question about COVID or more about the role of probiotics, drop us a note. You can email it to me at drjohn@webmd.net or post it on our social properties, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Thanks for watching.